And 3, 2, 1, welcome back to the Australian colonies, part 3 with Mr. Burns. Thank you. Here we are in part 3. Today's title is going to be The Hungry Years Famine. So put that down, thank you, because we're looking at the hungry years and we're looking at famine. And I wonder if you know what famine means. It means that people get hungry. It means they don't have enough food. So let's look at that now. You're going to be writing this down. Thank you very much. Captain Phillip arrived, and this is after they've been there a while, obviously. We've already spoken about that in class. He arrived with 2 years' worth of rations. So he'd gone and gotten food for them, for the settlers, that should last for 2 years. Now, the rations were of poor quality, guys, and they were weevil-ridden. Now, weevil is like little animals that live inside food. It's not fun to eat. Plus, they were pretty poor quality. So we talked about how people weren't really managing to grow the food. And let's be honest, the people who arrived in Australia were, as we've talked about, basically convicts and sailors and soldiers. They weren't farmers. Now, there was a promise made to these new settlers of regular supply ships coming from England or from different parts of the world, but everyone was aware that it was a long journey between Australia and England, and ships did sink, and that is what happened. So the early settlers in Australia sometimes just didn't have the food they needed. The first attempt at farming was at Farm Cove, and I wonder if you know where that is. It's now the Botanical Gardens, which is in Sydney. So that was where we tried first to farm. It didn't go very well. It was not very successful because convicts knew nothing of farming. Convicts were basically criminals, guys. They weren't very serious criminals like perhaps we have today. Perhaps their big crime was stealing a loaf of bread, but they were still just criminals. Remember that. They were criminals sent out of England to populate Australia. They were not farmers. These convicts, they scratched at the soil rather than tilling the soil, right? Like you meant to dig deep into the soil to put the seeds down. And rats and mice just came and ate the grain that was planted because it just wasn't planted deep enough. So the rats and the mice would just come along and eat the grain that was planted, and so the grain would not grow, but at least Mr. Rat, I've tried to draw a rat, would have a good time. Now, Captain Phillip placed himself on the same rations as the convicts, so he was very clear that he wasn't going to get special treatment. He would just get what everybody else got. Because, you know, the Queen wanted this to be a success, and Captain Arthur Phillip wanted this new settlement, Australia, to be a success. And so it's important that Captain Arthur Phillip was hungry too, because then he felt everyone else's pain. So a few things happened here, moving along a bit. In June 1988, there was some good soil found up at Richmond Hill, which is about 160 kilometres up Hawkesbury River. And settlers moved there, and they have had 23 floods, 1 drought and 1 bushfire in the first 25 years of settlement, which wouldn't have been very much fun for them. A year down the track in January, things weren't going much better. There was a convict absconder. Now, an absconder means someone who tries to run away, and he was hanged for stealing food. So remember, they were still using the death penalty there. 8 weeks later, 7 sailors were charged with stealing food, but they didn't actually get hung, okay? Oh, well, 6 were hung the next day. Sorry, I forgot about that. So it seems that 6 were hung the next day. So you can see, guys, people were very, very hungry. There just was not enough food to go around, and that's why we call this the hungry years, and that's why we refer to this as famine, early famine in Australia. People weren't going so well in the very early times at Australia. The good news was a chap called Captain Sirius, who'd been sent out by Arthur Phillip, and here Captain Sirius, and here he is here. Oh, Captain Sirius returned from Cape Town, which is actually South Africa. Now, he had supplies that would last for 4 months, so the flour would last for 4 months, so people had things to eat, which is good news. Move along to August. Captain Arthur Phillip set up a system of convict night watchmen. So they were going to be the new guards, if that makes sense, to deter theft from gardens and the chicken coops, because people were stealing food because they were so hungry. And in October, food rations were again reduced. Remember, they were living off food that came over on the boat mostly, so they were reducing these food rations because they were running out. The good news was that they were managing to catch some fish from the harbour, from Sydney Harbour, and these were supplementing or adding to the meat rations, so that's good news. And the first harvest, thank goodness, they finally got a harvest going, and that produced 20 bushels of wheat and 35 bushels of barley. But that was basically saved for next year because they were going to need it for next year. So you can see that people were hungry. It wasn't going so well. Right, in chapter 4, we're going to learn about what happened down the track and why we're all still here, basically, and why the Australian settlement was in the end successful. Now, I do want you to get all this down. Thank you very much. So when you've written that in your book, then here's the activity I want you to do. I want you to choose one item that stands out from that narrative that I've just told you, and I want you to title it, and I want you to represent it. I want you to draw it neatly in your history book. One item from all of this that occurred, we talked about a lot there. I want you to title it, and then I want you to draw it neatly in your history book. All right, thank you very much for being a part of this.